When Principal Margaret Thornton became Jefferson High School's most trusted educational leader, parents relied on her to protect their children's futures. But when her prescription drug addiction and embezzlement schemes consumed her, she began selling student records to identity thieves and murdering teachers who discovered her crimes, turning the school into a deadly data harvesting operation. Before starting the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the video. The Oregon autumn leaves swirled across Jefferson High School's campus as Principal Margaret Thornton organized falsified student transcripts and criminal organization communication devices for what would become the most dangerous educational operation of her 24-year career as Portland's most experienced high school principal and educational administrator. At 55 years old, Margaret had established herself as Oregon's premier educational leader, controlling student records and federal education funding that attracted identity theft organizations, data trafficking networks, and organized crime syndicates who valued her access to student personal information and her reputation for coordinating the most comprehensive educational programs affecting student data management and federal funding coordination throughout the state education system. Margaret's principal office occupied the administrative center of Jefferson High School's main building, featuring student record systems, federal funding coordination facilities, and educational program management centers that allowed her to oversee the school's most sensitive educational operations while maintaining absolute control over student personal data, worth millions, and federal education coordination affecting student privacy and educational funding throughout the regional school district. The interior of Margaret's office reflected her mastery of educational administration and her understanding of school system expectations for both educational excellence and absolute confidentiality during the most critical student data management procedures affecting educational privacy, featuring walls displaying educational achievements from prestigious institutions, photographs of successful graduation ceremonies, and testimonials from grateful parents whose children had succeeded through her educational leadership and strategic academic guidance affecting student advancement and educational opportunity. But beneath Margaret's reputation for educational excellence lay a dangerous combination of prescription benzodiazepine addiction, systematic student data trafficking, and calculated murder that had transformed her school operations into criminal enterprises where threatening teachers and suspicious investigators met their fate through educational accidents and witness elimination during vulnerable school activities and student data procedures. "Good morning, Principal Thornton," said Assistant Principal James Rodriguez, arriving for his weekly administrative meeting about ongoing student programs and federal oversight that required Margaret's coordination for educational compliance and student data management affecting school operations. James had recently discovered irregular student record procedures and had begun questioning Margaret's explanations about data protocols that seemed to bypass normal school oversight processes and federal education privacy requirements. "Good morning, Assistant Principal Rodriguez," Margaret replied with the educational authority and administrative expertise that had made her legendary among Portland school personnel, who viewed her as both educational innovator and student advocate capable of managing complex federal education programs through sophisticated administrative coordination and strategic student support affecting educational excellence and academic achievement throughout the school district. James had become Margaret's most dangerous subordinate, not because of his demanding administrative requirements or his federal coordination responsibilities, but because of his recent discovery of unauthorized student data transfers and his growing awareness of the identity theft operation that Margaret had been conducting while supposedly providing legitimate educational administration for student programs and federal education coordination. What James didn't know was that Margaret had been systematically selling student personal information and murdering school personnel for over 3 years, using her principal authority and access to student records to coordinate identity theft operations while eliminating anyone who discovered her data trafficking or threatened to expose her criminal exploitation of educational resources for organized crime coordination and student information harvesting affecting student privacy and educational integrity. Margaret's transformation from respected principal to calculating killer had begun 5 years earlier, when her prescription benzodiazepine addiction had escalated from legitimate anxiety management during demanding educational conferences to daily dependency that consumed her substantial principal salary and forced her into relationships with identity theft organizations who offered enormous payments for access to student personal information and educational records for criminal identity theft operations affecting student financial security and personal privacy. Her addiction cost over $5,000 per day, while her access to Jefferson High School's comprehensive student database provided unprecedented opportunities for coordinating identity theft operations that generated millions through organized crime networks seeking personal information for financial fraud and identity theft affecting student populations and educational privacy throughout the school system. Her criminal activities escalated when several teachers and school oversight personnel discovered evidence of unauthorized student data access and threatened to report their suspicions to educational oversight agencies and federal law enforcement organizations investigating identity theft targeting student populations and educational institutions throughout Oregon school districts. Margaret murdered her first victim, a suspicious school counselor who detected irregular student record access patterns, by orchestrating a stairwell accident using organized crime assets that appeared to be school facility incident rather than premeditated assassination designed to protect identity theft operations. The success of her first murder convinced Margaret that eliminating threatening school personnel and suspicious oversight investigators was both necessary for protecting her trafficking operation and achievable given her complete principal authority and her ability to coordinate with criminal organizations who could stage school accidents and eliminate witnesses while providing plausible cover stories involving educational facility hazards and school safety issues. Over the following 3 years, Margaret murdered 11 additional individuals using various organized crime methods and educational coordination that took advantage of her principal authority, her access to criminal networks during vulnerable school activities, and her ability to stage deaths as school accidents or educational incidents that occurred during routine school operations with personnel who had access to sensitive information that could expose identity theft operations. Her victims had been carefully selected based on their discovery of her criminal activities, their potential cooperation with educational authorities, or their knowledge of student data procedures that could expose her criminal coordination and systematic trafficking of student information affecting school oversight and educational privacy compliance. Her victims included teacher Patricia Williams, a computer education specialist who had discovered evidence of systematic data trafficking and whose school consultation had resulted in fatal electrical accident staged by criminal assets during routine technology maintenance. Counselor David Foster, who had reported suspicious data activities and whose Jefferson High meeting had ended in fatal chemical exposure using substances obtained through criminal networks. And Agent Jennifer Martinez, a federal education privacy investigator who had been tracking student data crimes and whose school inspection had resulted in fatal exposure to concentrated drugs disguised as educational supply contamination, affecting federal oversight of school data operations. The identity theft operation had become extraordinarily sophisticated, with Margaret coordinating the systematic harvesting of student personal information through carefully planned data access and criminal organization coordination that provided comprehensive student identity profiles for financial fraud and criminal identity theft affecting student populations and educational privacy throughout the school system. Student enrollment procedures served as primary data harvesting operations, with Margaret personally coordinating the collection and transfer of student personal information, including social security numbers, family financial data, and educational records to identity theft organizations, seeking comprehensive identity profiles for financial crime and organized criminal activities affecting student privacy and financial security. The most disturbing aspect of the operation was the systematic targeting of vulnerable student populations for identity theft, with Margaret identifying suitable victims through educational consultations and academic evaluations that assessed family financial status and student isolation from protective networks who might investigate identity theft or question educational data security affecting student privacy and financial protection. Multiple students had become victims of identity theft as a direct result of Margaret's data trafficking operations, with young people experiencing financial fraud, credit damage, and identity theft affecting their future educational and financial opportunities, while criminal organizations use their personal information for ongoing criminal activities throughout their academic careers and beyond. Principal Thornton, I need to discuss serious concerns about student data trafficking and reports of identity theft connected to your educational operations, said FBI Special Agent Sarah Torres of the Bureau's Cybercrimes Division, arriving at Margaret's office carrying federal warrants to inspect her data procedures and interview her about suspicious educational activities. Special Agent Torres specialized in investigating educational crimes and had developed expertise in recognizing patterns of student data trafficking and identity theft affecting school operations throughout educational institutions. Special Agent Torres's investigation represented an existential threat to Margaret's criminal operation, as her federal cybercrime expertise and access to identity theft databases could expose the systematic data trafficking operations and connect her to multiple suspicious deaths during school activities and educational meetings affecting federal oversight and education law enforcement cooperation. Special Agent Torres, I think there may be some misunderstanding about complex educational data management and the unfortunate reality that school personnel sometimes experience facility hazards despite advanced safety protocols and federal coordination measures, Margaret said, while discreetly activating a concealed emergency communication system that would summon corrupt school employees who were part of her identity theft network for emergency elimination of federal law enforcement threats. Perhaps we could discuss these concerns in our student data facility, where I can demonstrate the educational procedures that might explain these tragic school incidents. Educational administration involves complex student privacy operations that might appear suspicious to those unfamiliar with federal education data coordination and identity theft criminal targeting affecting educational operations. Special Agent Torres agreed to examine Margaret's educational procedures, not realizing that the principal was leading her to a secure facility where previous murders had been committed and where Margaret planned to coordinate her elimination using identity theft network assets, while staging the scene as federal agent targeting that occurred during educational investigation, providing cover for her elimination while appearing to be criminal retaliation rather than deliberate murder by a principal protecting her data trafficking operations. But Margaret's carefully planned murder of the federal agent was about to be prevented by the unexpected arrival of educational oversight officers who had been investigating school irregularities and had identified connections to her systematic identity theft activities affecting educational operations and student privacy programs. Educational Inspector Michael Santos had been conducting comprehensive investigation into school corruption and student data trafficking that exploited principal authority to facilitate identity theft and eliminate potential witnesses to educational crimes affecting school oversight and federal education law enforcement cooperation. Inspector Santos specialized in investigating educational crimes and had developed expertise in tracking school operations that compromised student privacy while conducting systematic elimination of threats to identity theft operations affecting educational integrity and student data security. The educational investigation had been initiated by reports from multiple school oversight agencies and student privacy organizations who noticed patterns of suspicious data access and school personnel deaths, suggesting identity theft networks were infiltrating educational institutions to facilitate student data trafficking while eliminating witnesses through sophisticated methods disguised as school accidents. Principal Margaret Thornton, I'm Inspector Santos with Educational Oversight, he announced as he entered the data facility where Margaret was coordinating Special Agent Torres's elimination. I have educational warrants for your investigation on charges of systematic student data trafficking, educational corruption, identity theft, and multiple counts of first-degree murder related to your exploitation of principal authority for criminal operations affecting student privacy and educational integrity. Margaret's reaction to the educational oversight intervention was desperate attempts to maintain her academic credibility, as she realized that federal agents and educational investigators had been investigating her trafficking activities and connected them to systematic school personnel murders and criminal coordination affecting educational operations. Special Agent Torres looked stunned as she realized how close she had come to being murdered by the principal she was investigating for student data crimes. Her educational investigation had not only exposed Margaret's trafficking and murder operation, but also prevented her own death at hands of a killer using educational authority as cover for systematic elimination of federal agents and educational crime investigation threats. The comprehensive investigation that followed Margaret's arrest revealed the full scope of her criminal enterprise and sophisticated methods she had developed to exploit principal authority for systematic student data trafficking and murder. Forensic analysis of Margaret's educational operations revealed extensive evidence of her trafficking activities, including sophisticated data harvesting equipment for student information coordination procedures, detailed records of identity theft worth millions, and comprehensive files containing student personal information that had been sold to criminal organizations affecting educational oversight and student privacy protection. The investigation uncovered Margaret's connections to identity theft organizations who had been coordinating educational institution, infiltration, and student data trafficking operations, while using her principal access to harvest student information and eliminate witnesses through sophisticated methods disguised as educational accidents and school facility incidents affecting school personnel and federal investigators. Most disturbing was discovery of Margaret's detailed knowledge of educational data systems and identity theft coordination procedures, which she had used to develop increasingly sophisticated approaches for trafficking student information while eliminating school personnel who discovered her criminal operations or threatened to expose her organized crime coordination activities affecting student privacy and educational integrity. Principal Margaret Thornton was ultimately convicted of 12 counts of first-degree murder, systematic student data trafficking, educational corruption, identity theft, conspiracy with criminal organizations, and numerous other charges related to her exploitation of principal authority for criminal operations affecting student privacy and educational integrity. The conviction sent unprecedented shockwaves throughout Jefferson High School, prompting immediate reforms in educational oversight, student data monitoring, and principal addiction prevention measures designed to protect student populations from exploitation by corrupted educational officials involved in identity theft activities. Several other principals and educational officials were investigated for similar criminal activities, resulting in enhanced oversight of school operations and new requirements for data security verification, student privacy monitoring, and federal cooperation measures, making it difficult for identity theft networks to exploit educational authority for systematic student data trafficking operations. Special Agent Torres and Inspector Santos received recognition for their collaborative investigation and became specialists in educational crime investigation, developing new techniques for identifying student data trafficking operations and protecting educational privacy from exploitation by corrupted school officials. Assistant Principal James Rodriguez and other surviving school personnel required extensive psychological counseling and career rehabilitation to overcome trauma of learning that their trusted principal had been systematically selling student information and murdering school employees while exploiting her authority for identity theft activities. The case prompted comprehensive changes in educational regulation, including mandatory federal oversight and addiction screening for principals with student data authority, enhanced monitoring of educational operations and data procedures, real-time federal supervision of student privacy protection, and new reporting procedures for suspicious educational activities involving student privacy violations. Margaret's conviction led to increased cooperation between educational oversight agencies and federal organizations investigating identity theft, with new protocols designed to identify school systems that might be exploited for systematic criminal activities while eliminating witnesses to educational corruption and student privacy violations. 5 years after Margaret's conviction and life imprisonment, Jefferson High School continued implementing safeguards designed to protect student populations from principals who might abuse their positions for criminal purposes, affecting educational integrity and federal oversight. The principal, who had promised to protect students' futures and advance educational excellence, had instead used her educational authority to commit systematic identity theft and murder while exploiting school resources for criminal coordination, threatening foundations of student privacy and educational integrity. Principal Margaret Thornton's final lesson had been permanently concluded by comprehensive investigation of educational and federal justice, where she would serve multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, proving that even educational officials who attempted to exploit their school authority for criminal gain could be identified, investigated, and brought to justice when dedicated federal agencies worked together to protect student privacy from predatory educational corruption. The principal's final lesson had ended with her permanent removal from educational service, serving as lasting reminder that those entrusted with student welfare must never abuse that sacred responsibility, and that educational officials who would exploit student trust and academic authority for criminal gain will ultimately face full consequences of their betrayal of educational integrity and student protection. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.